Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of The Big Story. I'm Jeffrey Goldberg. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. I'm happy to have all of you on board today. This is a digital event series, many of you know, where we go behind the scenes with our writers here at The Atlantic to talk about our latest reporting and analysis. When we started this, back in March. We thought we'd be doing this for 2 or 3 weeks. Here we are. It's almost August, and we're still doing it. We'd like to come back to live events, but we don't see that coming in the near term. And that's kind of an introduction to today's topic, the decline of the American world. It's connected in the sense that other countries have figured out how to manage their coronavirus pandemic. This country has not, and we're going to talk about why and what it all means. Please remember that we'll take your questions during the conversation, so you can type them into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. Please keep them short. Please ID yourself if possible, and where you're writing in from. Keep them in the form of a question. That makes it marginally easier to ask. And with that, let me bring in Tom McTague, direct from London, from our London bureau, actually probably from his house. Used to be of our London bureau. Tom is one of the great British commentators and analysts and reporters on, among other things, the transatlantic alliance, on the future of Europe, Brexit. He knows a lot of things. And we were very glad when Tom joined our team last year. Was it just last year, Tom?
I know, it feels like a long time ago.
I've lost all sense of time. So I don't know. You could be with the Atlantic for 30 years at this point. I don't even know. But we're glad to have Tom with us today. And I wanted to just let you know that the program is being recorded and will be available after the event. You could find that in the chat, and you could probably find it on our site and so on. We'd like to have people have access to these in the future. Tom, the decline of the American world, little happy, light topic that you've been writing on. I brought up the fact that, you know, here it is months later, we're still doing these events this way because Americans are, America is too sick to actually get together in any kind of live way. Before we start in talking about the role America plays in the world, British-U.S. relations, what it all means, give us a little bit of an update on the pandemic in the UK right now. I assume we have a lot of participants, a lot of viewers from the UK, but our American watchers would like to know where Britain and the US have been traveling along together on this trip, and where they might be diverging. Can you give us a little bit of an update?
Yeah, well, reporting live from the little Satan over here. We're pretty sick as well compared to you. So, you know, we've just had some government figures out today, which put our coronavirus excess mortality rate at the highest in Europe. So we didn't get hit first. That happened to Italy. So we had time. We have had, you know, the cool in Europe. We had some of the best universities. We had like the US, we were rated number 2 behind the US in terms of like pandemic rate. And then we'll hit it all. We got hit worse than anyone else. So we've lost about 60,000 people compared to, I think, what you're at about 150,000. So there are the same kind of questions here as going on in the US. I think where there is a big difference, and I don't think this isn't always up internationally, is that Boris Johnson might have a reputation for being a kind of Trumpish figure, a populist leading one of the sort of conservative revolutions. And that's partly true, of course. But he took a very different tack here. And that in some ways, it's even more worrying in that Boris Johnson followed the scientists. He stood on platforms and basically nodded along and followed what the clever people were telling him to do. And we still failed, and we failed really badly. We failed as badly as New York or Florida is doing right now. Seriously enough or listen to the experts in the kind of way that you've got a problem, or Brazil's got a problem. So to some extent, I think there's like systemic problems here, and similar to France in a way. There are these the failures, the very obvious failures that are taking place in places like the US and the UK are causing these existential questions like, God, we thought we were strong and it turns out we're not.
Mm. But is it fair to say that, well, and this gets right into it, the post World War II, the British system, the British psyche adjusted itself to being, was it Tony Blair who referred to Britain once as the wingman of the United States? The expression has been used. Britain contracted a bit. The empire came undone, and this might sound condescending. It's not meant to be condescending at all, but Great Britain adjusted, the UK adjusted its own expectations about its role in the world. And I think maybe the US is in the process of trying to figure out what its role in the world is, and the world is trying to figure out that dynamic. But your leadership is not quite used to wanting to take charge of the whole world, whereas ours, at least before this president, assumed that the world was waiting for the US to lead it. Do you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I mean, so there was we've sort of struggled to find the idea that, what Britain's role in the world is going to be. I think it was Acheson who said, Britain's lost its empire and has failed to find its role. And we've had pretty condescending ideas about what that could be. Like, I think Harold Macmillan, Prime Minister here at the same time as Kennedy, had the idea that we were kind of the Greece to your Rome, and we would explain to you how to run an empire now that you've taken it off us. And now it seems, we're going to explain to you how you give it up and how you accept mid-tier status. Now, I think that's basically completely overblown from the people I speak to. Most people still say, look, we live in an extraordinarily American world. And in fact, like over the last few weeks, and part of the inspiration for the piece was that we react to what happens in the US more than anywhere else. So you have an issue with police violence and racism and very particular issues in the US. But suddenly we have demonstrations here ourselves, and we have people mimicking the same kind of gestures and slogans because they have this impact. And like I was saying to your guys before, I've just come up, I've just turned Frozen 2 off for my son. Like the soft cultural power of the US is dominant. And people like Tony Blair will say when they go and speak to African leaders, they want America to be, the empire it was, because they don't want to be completely overtaken by China. They want to see America because it's a more benevolent empire if there is one. So the world has this kind of strange relationship with the US, including the UK, France, and Germany, obviously, where we are kind of reacting to the US. I think I put it in the piece, sometimes like teenagers, who are demanding their parents drop them off at the club, but they don't want them to hang around and embarrass them. They want to have all the benefits of the relationship without the costs. So this is but you're seeing this untangling, I think, and a loss of the American spell. And you see that today with the Trump tweet about will he try to delay the election? All of these things, they kind of chip away at that soft power, that aspiration that America is the place to aspire to.
Well, early in our conversations about the piece that you wound up writing, we talked about a certain kind of framework. I mean, we both have studied this issue for quite a while. The framework that you used in the piece is that the U.S. is accustomed to being loathed, hated around the world, admired, envied, respected, but never pitied, right? And that the introduction of pity into the formula is the thing that is so. It's not only disturbing and saddening from an American perspective. It's actually jarring, right? I mean, so talk about that, the introduction of this new emotion that people overseas are feeling, which is pity at the kind of not to overstate it too much, or maybe it's not an overstatement at all, but at the kind of pathetic quality of an America that can't get it together.
Yeah, I think when I was speaking to people, a lot of them would talk about crises in American history from the Second World War on, and these were deep crises with civil rights or violence towards Black Americans. All of these kind of things that you would watch them on screens in Europe, and you would wince, and you'd say, "Oh, the images are violent. There is a rawness there." But there are also always these sort of extraordinarily powerful figures, kind of beacons of hope and eloquence and oratory. Often, political leaders, but often not necessarily elected, like Martin Luther King or JFK or Ronald Reagan. And those figures, even recently, I would have said in Parliament here in Britain, you would have had a considerable wing of the Conservative Party would have still been looking back to that era and looking to the US and being obsessed by US politics and that idea of being able to regenerate yourself and optimism and growth. And, often, obviously, looking back to Reagan and Thatcher and that era, it's just a sense of mine, but you don't see that as much. You don't see the grip of American politics on the Conservative Party in the same way. I think the same is true in Germany and France. You're looking to other countries as the model of, look, when you're looking at the coronavirus, you just can't look to Britain or America as models, because we clearly haven't done very well. We clearly haven't got it under control. You look to somewhere like Germany, and I think it's frustrating for a lot of Brits here, but they are just hands down winning. They're just winning this. They're winning the economic race. They're winning the coronavirus, contest, if it is one. So I think those things are important, and it's that sense of like, you wince when you look over at the US and think, oh God, this is going to take off, isn't it, in the South? And then how are they going to get it under control in Texas or Florida if nobody's taking it seriously? So it's those kind of things that really cut through, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I want to get to your diagnosis of what happened, or your analysis of what happened, but it's interesting how quickly this has all occurred, at least in let's say, the Europe-US dynamic. I mean, I remember everything feels like a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago that Barack Obama was giving speeches to hundreds of thousands of people at the Brandenburg Gate. Or I remember his visit to Dublin. It shut the city down, right? I mean, tens of thousands of Irish citizens came out to just get a glimpse of the American president. It was like a campaign rally, but he wasn't running. So two questions. One, what happened from your perspective? And two, and this is the big one, is this recoverable, or are we on a downward slope?
So on the first one, I mean, Obama's power here, and like I say, I think it's similar to what you see with the response to the George Floyd killing. You see these protest marches in the UK, and this real effect, actually. You've had statues of former slave owners toppled into the sea and right, not being put back up. You're having real change happening and inspired by things that are happening in the US. So there is still that optimistic power from the US, the cultural power, and you see that with Obama. You know, he is the good guy. He's the compared to the sort of Trump baddie, and you actually it was quite fawning and embarrassing over here in London as well, not just Dublin and Berlin. I remember Obama given the honor of speaking to both houses of parliament, and MPs sort of lining up to try and grab his hand and shake his hand, or just to touch him, like, you know, he would rub off his stardust onto them. It was kind of weird.
Doesn't
But that,
matter English.
yeah, and then, you know, at the same time, a lot of the Brexiteers that you speak to credit him with a sort of turning point when he came over, and David Cameron's team was so desperate to get Obama on side that they asked him to basically make it clear that Britain would go to the back of the queue in trade negotiations if Britain left the European Union. And he said that, and it actually appeared to have the opposite effect, and it riled people up who pro-Brexit, and how dare they tell me, you know, this, and after all we've done, etc. So, you know, no other country really has that power. Nobody would care what, you know, the Japanese prime minister would say in that regard. So there is still extraordinary cut through. And then on is it recoverable? I think a lot of people, it's a sort of a yes and a no answer. I think I don't think Biden comes in, if he comes in, and all is well in the world, everything is forgotten. You know, it's kind of like, you know, domestic violence. You know, it happens once and you're wary, you know. So I think the Germans, who are about to lose how many thousands of troops from Germany, that's a permanent thing. You know, the question mark over NATO and protection of the Baltics, that's a permanent question mark in your head. And also just the fact that, you know, this could happen again, right? This could happen in 2024, or it could happen in 2020.
Oh, wait, could you stay on that for a second? Because I want you to answer this question. Do you think that we're almost a bipolar country in a kind of way?
It looks like that, but that again, I would say it feels very similar here. You know, it's there are a couple of countries, there are a couple of Britons. There's more than two Britons, to be honest. You know, because you've got Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales that feel very different at the moment. There's this sense of paralysis that it's so deep, the division, that is it recoverable? And that's what a lot of European diplomats that I spoke to for the piece, who had spent time in the US and loved the US and came back sort of energized and full of this admiration that you often get from Europeans who come back from America, a feeling of, wow, there is something there, there is an energy there. Often some come back radicalized and become more left wing, and that they can't accept the level of inequality and poverty, so they kind of push one way. But usually they're affected by it. You either pushed one way or the other. But they're affected by it. And those that I spoke to said that the thing that they are concerned about is the depth of the division, both in the country itself and the political class, that they felt was different this time. You know, there weren't the senators like there were in Watergate, who would, you know, there's only one Mitt Romney. You know, there used to be more. And secondly, that there always was the president who had either the eloquence, the vision, or the you know, the intelligence. I mean, Nixon was a strategic genius. You know, a lot of people here would sort of credit him. I know conservative MPs who, you know, obsessed with Nixon. You don't think that Trump is a genius, or, you know, a grand, you know, masterful, eloquent president reaching for the stars. You know, it's neither. So there's that problem. So that said, I don't think it is completely unrecoverable. A lot of people think, okay, so America, that mark lasts, but we've all been through, we've all elected, you know, bad prime ministers and bad presidents, and been through difficult times. America is still extraordinarily powerful, and its reserves are extraordinarily deep. You sit here in the UK and you look at the American economy. There's every chance the American economy will bounce back quicker than any European economy. because of the dynamism that's there, the strength of the industrial base. All of the tech companies are in the US. There are no tech companies in Europe to speak of. And of course, we're still sheltering under your protective arm.
Well, let's say we were just talking about this before. There's a huge irony here, or I don't know if it's an irony, but the paradox, the observation I was going to make is that Americans now are thought to be too sick to be allowed into Europe. Americans as individual tourists, right? Our viral load here is such that no country wants us, but we're also protecting your countries. American troops in Germany, across Europe, in South Korea, Japan, and so on. And so I go back to Ottoman history, the sick man of Europe or something like that. Sort of, we're like the sick man of the world in a kind of way, but the world is still dependent on us. It's just, that's an extraordinary, sort of weirdness of all of this. What is the reaction inside the UK to the fact that Americans, I mean, nobody's traveling that much, but is there relief that this summer, the streets of London are not filled with Americans?
We're quite Eurocentric in on that question of travel. So we've just had a ban, a quarantine enforced by the government that if you travel, if any Brit goes to Spain on holiday, they now have to quarantine themselves for 2 weeks when they come back, and that was announced within a sort of, there was no warning that was coming. So there were a load of Brits in Spain. So in that regard, I think people just want to go to America. That would be my sense. They want to get back to a situation where they can go to Florida and the theme park to New York. I don't think there is a kind of Schadenfreude that haha, the Americans can't come over here. There's fewer baseball caps in London. I don't think there is any of that. I just think there is a general sense that oh my God, what's going on over there? And you just see the images on the news.
I want to go to this issue of permanent decline, and here are two discordant observations. The first is that let's assume, for purposes of this conversation, and we should never assume this, but for purposes of this conversation, Donald Trump loses, Joe Biden comes in. At the end of Donald Trump's term, America will most likely have the largest economy in the world, the strongest military, the best collection of universities, and the most technological innovation, right? The same things that it had when Barack Obama was president and George W. Bush before him, and so on. So it's hard to say that the empire, so to speak, has collapsed with that. On the other hand, the question to you is, as a overseas analyst, is how did a country of 330 million people manage to pick Donald Trump to be their president? And what are the long-term consequences of that? You've alluded to this already, that if there is to be a recovery of reputation, it's not going to be instantaneous. But how do you help our American listeners specifically understand exactly how far away we are from what we thought to have been a very durable post-World War II system of alliances and the possession of a certain kind of reputation in the world?
I think that ultimately Donald Trump is a reflection of the dramatic changes that are happening in the world. He is not the core of these. He speeds them up or he accentuates them, but he is a reflection. That's why America can choose somebody like him, because he comes along and he gives voice to very big and real things that are changing. There are big migrations of people that are happening from poorer parts of the world to richer parts of the world. That's happening in the US and that's happening in Europe. And you're seeing political responses to that in Europe just as much as the US. But ultimately, what is the major thing that has happened in the world that is going to be the story of the 21st century? That is the rise of China. And Donald Trump gave voice to that. Now his solutions may be bad, crazy, wrong, anything. They might be right, who knows? But he spoke to them, and I think the people that I've been speaking to will talk about the really big changes that are happening economically in parts of the US, and the same that is happening where I'm from in the north of England or in parts of depressed France, and they're finding similar responses. So there is a notion that I don't know if I think it's called Trump opportunities. There is this idea that Trump,
You just make
without
that up.
I haven't made it up. I'll give it credit. There's a site of War on the Rocks and it's their idea, but it's this idea that he kind of accidentally stumbles on potential changes that America will take at some point, whether it's under him or under Biden. Ultimately, America is going to have to pull away from Russia as the main threat and turn and face towards China, which is your only strategic threat. Europe is going to have to take more strain in its own backyard, whether it's in North Africa or Russia. And there's going to have to be some kind of concert of powers that is established to deal with and to the threat or challenge. All of those things happen. They're going to continue to happen under a Biden presidency, and Britain respond to them. So I think all of these issues that Trump has somehow accidentally alighted on, it's like, is it intuitive? Is it just is he just fumbling to get there? The same issues in the Middle East. And you look, a lot of the people I spoke to said, some of this started under Obama, like his unwillingness to support the intervention in Libya. Now you could say with very good reason, look at what's happened in Libya. But his view seemed to be, well, look, this is your backyard. This is your security issue. If Britain and France together, the two biggest military powers in Europe, can't sort this out, why does America have to bail you out? And ultimately, America did have to bail both Britain and France out because they couldn't launch that operation alone. Similar questions in Afghanistan and the Middle East. Is it time that America, that's not the strategic question. The strategic question is China. So it seems to me from here that Chinese question is the all-dominant question, and America has changed and is ahead of Europe on that question.
Before we go to some of the questions that we have from our audience, let me ask you a follow-up on the China question. There are a lot of people in Europe, leaders and others, who are wary of the United States now, are pitying the United States in some regard, obviously they're showing some level of contempt for the chosen president or the elected president of the United States. Is there anything attractive in the UK or in the continent? Are people finding anything attractive about alliances with China? Or is the saving grace here for the US is that our allies don't exactly want to flock to Beijing for protection or for alliance building?
Yeah, I mean, there is something attractive about China, and that's just cash, So Britain, my thesis on Britain would be, since 2008, where the economic crash hit us particularly hard, we're essentially not as rich as we thought we were. And the Osborne-Cameron government that preceded the Theresa May government, their view on China was, hey, it's time to get real. It's time to make some money. Britain needs to get on board because the Germans are getting on board, the Italians, the French, everyone's making a lot of money. So if you're going to place your bet, you place it on the place that's growing. Right. Now, I think one thing Donald Trump has done, or his administration has done, is they have quite successfully put pressure on the UK, Australia, and New Zealand to choose, to actually, if you're going to do that, we're going to impose some costs on you. That's not a cost-free decision that you can take. If you want to go with Huawei, that's going to come with a problem. And he's been quite successful in forcing a change in the UK. Now, I don't think he's had similar success in Europe. Now, the big question is Germany. and where Germany goes. And a lot of people seem to think ultimately they're too interconnected. There is this idea that I like, actually, that America is becoming a kind of Britain of the 19th century. Britain was like the offshore balancing power that intervened to ensure that no one country dominated Europe. And that's the role that America could take
Mm-hmm.
in the 21st century. It's no longer entirely dominant, but it just needs to ensure that China doesn't dominate the entire Eurasian continent.
But let me expand the ambit a little bit with one of our questions here. As the U.S. declines, how much will that take the UK and EU's global influence with it? In other words, can you let's assume decline? Do you also assume that that the EU and Britain are sort of lashed to the US and are go down together?
Yeah, so that's quite a powerful attack line that is used here. You know that uh, uh, Boris Johnson has lashed himself to the Trump mast, and you know he's desperately trying to get a U.S. trade deal, and it's embarrassing. And why would you shouldn't align yourself with Trump? It's terrible, etc. So that is a power. That's an attack line that's used in European politics to some effect. I think it's ultimately these are questions that European politicians are grappling with, and I think essentially it's in their hands. You know, they are not colonies of the US. They're sheltering under the US sort of security umbrella. But it's up to them. They've enjoyed not spending money on defense and spending on other things and becoming quite rich. But so the question is, can they find a mechanism through the European Union or something else to take the burden that the US has had? And this is exactly what Emmanuel Macron and Merkel talk about. And Macron talked about it in an Economist interview where he essentially said the lesson of Trump is that Europe needs to find its own voice and find its own power in the world and become another pole. And that's what Merkel seems to be moving towards. I think there's a hell of a lot of skepticism out there that Europe will ever do that. So maybe Europe does fall away because it can't find its voice.
Right. Here's a related question. Sorry, I should ID the questions. Michael Bone sends in a question. At the risk of being overly reductionist, can all of this be laid at the feet of Trump? Would this be going on if Clinton had been elected?
Yeah, so I'm in the camp that it can't be laid all at Trump. I think ultimately these are structural issues, and it's the nature of the economy. You know, a lot of this can be traced back to actually. I think you can trace a lot of this back to the kind of end of the golden era of the 1990s and early 2000s, where huge decisions were made that have lasting consequences. China's introduction into the WTO changed the nature of the world economy, and you created a kind of world economy. You turbocharged globalization, and the first great crisis of globalization was 2008, which changed American and British politics forever. You know, without 2008, I don't think you get Donald Trump and you don't get Brexit. So I think these are structural issues. I do think that's not to say Trump doesn't matter. Trump is an extraordinarily influential person in that he almost accelerates this or gives it a power, and it doesn't necessarily have to go in that way. You can manage these issues clearly better than Trump and Brexit.
What do you think 4 more years of Trump would do to America's global standing and to Europe-U.S. relations?
Yeah, I think it is pretty bad, to be honest. I mean, that is, you know, the consensus view here. You know, there is a great worry that it's the US institutions and the things that we talked about before, the things that drive the American strength that get undermined by that. So this sort of a permanent damage to the US and a permanent inability then to get past it. You know, can these institutions that were rated as, you know, the best in the world and have now been shown to be quite weak when it comes to things like a pandemic, can they recover? I think those are the questions, and I think ultimately it forces Europe and America's partners to have to make other plans or to take out insurance against against American power, how to find their own way to influence the world. So that in that sense, it permanently changes things.
Right. Here's a question from Wendy Mim, which I think is an interesting one to listen to somebody not in the United States answer. A large percentage of the US population seems to no longer believe in or trust science. How is this impacting our reputation globally? Is this something that's discussed widely?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I bristle at it, I guess, instinctively, in that I think there is, and I touch upon it in the piece, in that there is always a kind of snobbish European attitude to America, that is is the aesthetic. It's about Americans are not as sophisticated as Europeans, who the Athens, Greece to Rome idea that the Europeans might have lost all the power, but they can still teach America about X, Y, and Z, and a mockery of American evangelicalism or religiosity, whatever it might be that Europeans disdain. And I think you see a bit of that with a sort of disdain for some of the scenes on TV about Americans, standing in bars with a gun and refusing to put a mask on. Those kind of scenes, and kind of delighting in look at American stupidity in action. I think the difference this time is that the president himself doesn't appear to, believe it. We have similar issues again with dismissal of experts and those kind of culture war rows. But Boris Johnson stands on stage like any other European leader and defers to the scientist next to him as the expert.
What do you think explains this anti-mask ferocity that seems to be fairly unique, at least in developed countries, maybe everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, we have the same here now. So we have the Twitter pictures of people going into shops refusing to wear their masks. I don't know. For me, the culture wars are so boring because you can just predict what everyone's going to say about virtually any subject. It's like, oh, you believe in X, Y, and Z, well, therefore you're going to be pro-mask or anti-mask. I don't see anyone. It's never that surprising to me what people think, and I think that's kind of strange. And that seems to be the same dividing line on mask wearing. So if you're opposed to masks, you're also pro-Brexit. How are those two things linked? But they appear to be, clearly linked.
Right. I want to wrap up with you in a second, but I want to ask you a question drawn from your piece. You opened the piece talking about John le Carre and his kind of aesthetic anti-Americanism that comes through in some of his characters. We've talked about this a lot. Talk about this question of the aesthetic. You alluded to the fact that people across Europe are demonstrating against racism in the United States. Very hard to find demonstrations in Europe denouncing concentration camps in China, hanging of gay people in Iran, Saudi this, Russia that. The focus is on America. Is there something about America that makes people, maybe just where you are, want to fail?
Yeah. I mean, you're a constant daily reminder that you're more powerful than we are. We used to be powerful. Our culture used to be the culture that dominated, and that's not the case now. You can't escape American influence and power. So even those who campaign against it are doing the thing that they dislike the most. They are confirming American cultural soft power over them by the very nature that that's what they complain about. That's what
by sitting in judgment, by thinking about it all the time, they're actually alerting you to the fact that they care.
Yeah, they care. They watch the American news. They mock the American news. They post clips of Fox News on their Twitter handles and tease it. And they don't do that to like the million Uyghurs that are currently in concentration camps, or as you say, what's happening in the Middle East. I mean, my colleague Helen wrote an excellent piece about this kind of thing, where it's you wash yourself by posting a Black Lives Matter badge on your page, your web page, while selling arms to Saudi Arabia or something like that. It's kind of nuts, but this is it's. So I think I kind of see so there is a childishness about it, and about the reaction to the US, the constant obsession by it. And the way that will change is when I think American decline will be true when Europe genuinely cares a lot less about America and is just getting on with being powerful itself. That would be the big change.
Final question. If you were advising Joe Biden, and I know you're not advising Joe Biden, but if you were advising Joe, let's assume Joe Biden or posit that Joe Biden wins. And naturally, we can both imagine that one of the big questions looming in his mind and in the mind of his Secretary of State and so on is, how do we recover from this? What would you say the United States would have to do over the next 4 years in order to restore our reputation and salience and influence, at least to the level of, somewhere in that period between the second Bush term, first Obama term, something along those lines? What would you tell them to do?
I guess you're going to have to start with some level of humility, I imagine, but it'll be that careful line of humility and apology. I think one of the issues in Britain is number 10 Downing Street think Britain goes around being too apologetic, and I don't think that ever looks good, does it, politically? So I think, but there has to be, it'll have to be sort of proof in the pudding. It will have to be, can the American economy grow more quickly than the US? Can Biden show his eloquence? Can his VP candidates show their eloquence? Can there be a sense of positivity, and can there be a sense of achievement again, a sense of aspiration for something, and some kind? I think ultimately there has to be this grand alliance that needs to be rebuilt and reimagined. It's kind of NATO 2, but it has to involve these emerging powers like India and Japan, and it has to try, I think, to some extent, to empower Europe to share the burden, and that requires some kind of grand bargain with a Merkel figure or a Macron figure. So that sense of optimism and energy to project that, I think that is going to be the sort of prime goal.
Got it. Tom, we're going to leave it there. We could talk all day about this. It's a fascinating subject. I know that our readers want to read more from you on this subject. I know that the editor wants to read you more on this subject, at least. It's a great piece, great series of pieces on this subject. It's a subject that's not going away. So I wanted to thank you for participating in this and your great writing. And I want to thank everyone who's watching right now. We want to let you know that our marquee Atlantic Festival will be back this September, virtually, of course, but stay tuned for more information on that and other events. This does give people an opportunity who can't get to Washington to participate in the Atlantic Festival, which is always a good time and an enlightening time. And so with that, I'll thank all of you for watching and wish you all well and see you soon. Thank you.